a lot of people want to make the Enneagram more like digestible or approachable or short,
Mhm.
sweet, and to the point, and it's like you can't, like, without losing some amount of its usefulness.
But I think that if people were really interested in transmitting understanding, they wouldn't reduce the Enneagram to such kind of easily misunderstood catchphrases.
Like, these types are not about how well you're doing with something. It's really about where you're located.
People are doing their type when they're conceptualizing the types.
The big hormone Enneagram.
Let me lay it on the line. I got a little freakiness inside. Let you know that the man has got to deal with it.
Hi, I'm John Lukovich, sexual self-pres, 4-5 wing, 458 trifix.
Hi, I'm David Gray, self-pres sexual 9-1, 974 trifix.
What up? It's Emeka. I'm an 8-wing-7, sexual self-pres with 854 fixes.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I am a self-pres social 3, wing 4, with a 369 trifix. If you like our podcast, guys, make sure you go like and subscribe on the Apple Podcast app. And if you really like us, you should definitely leave us a review.
It's your Enneagram himbos and bimbos. We're back. We had a little bit of a pause. So that is what a world is like without big hormone Enneagram. So make sure to help us out with all the whatever that we give you by sending us some money for our new updated sound equipment, please. And,
yes. BHEpodcast@gmail.com for our PayPal and EMEKV for Venmo. We already have $110 raised so far. We're trying to get to 500. As you can notice, everyone but Nancy at this point has a newer. Blame Amazon. She doesn't have her microphone because it got lost or somebody stole it.
Or my people who live in my building. You can blame them.
Yeah, but we're upgrading our sound equipment. Hopefully, people are noticing and can appreciate it. Just help us out. Send us like $10-$20. If we get like just 50 people to send us $10, we've reached our goal. It doesn't take very much, so help us out.
How can you ingest all this free fucking content and not give back? You know what I'm saying?
Yes. What other announcements do we have?
We have David's Trifix book. You can find it on Enneagrammer.com and Anyasite.com. We got my book. You can find it on bookshop.org and Amazon.com. Instinctual Drives the Enneagram. And we got anything else?
Dark Arts Academy. We
Right.
just released a typing video we did on Brene Brown. Lots
Can't
of
wait
people.
to watch that shit.
Lots of people are big fans of her. We just roasted her mercilessly.
God, that's
It
gonna
was-
be amazing.
It was glorious. So come watch a bunch of four wing 3 princess fix boys roast Brene Brown on the latest episode of the Dark Arts Academy.
Cool. So today we are talking about it's Enneagrams about motivation, not behavior. One of the most persistent comments you get in response to saying something innocuous about how, oh, this post or this person or this something doesn't really represent the type that, whoever's presenting this content or material thinks it's representing. And one thing that happens all the time is especially on the 4 groups, somebody posts something blatantly like flamingly 9 or some, an example of a celebrity that's flamingly not for something. And you're like, well, this seems like it might be indicative of attachment type. And they'll go, oh, but the Enneagram is about motivation, not behavior. You can't tell anything about the blah, 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 the outside or anything like that. And that's wrong. It is about motivation, and it's also about behavior. And behavior comes from motivation. So we're going to talk about that today.
One of the things I was wondering is this probably originated from either Susan Stabile or Ian Crone, because it's only in the last couple years that people have been throwing this around.
Yeah, it's part of the Christian culture thing is don't type other people. And that's actually not what we're doing. And that is another topic is just how attachment types unconsciously, reflexively assume that when you're saying that something in a post is not 4-ish, that you're then retyping them.
Right.
Well, it's also kind of hypocritical in the sense that people are making posts in groups and saying that this is 4 or this is 5. And if you respond and say, this isn't 4 or this isn't 5 and here's why, then they respond, it's about motivation, not behavior. So they are using examples, behavioral examples, to try to say this is a type. But when you,
True.
provide a reason why that's incorrect, that's when they hit you back with it's motivation, not behavior.
My issue with that saying is like there's a little bit of it that is true, right? Because it technically is about motivation that comes from behavior, like you said, or behavior comes from motivation. But I think what people misunderstand is that, or people think they know their own motivation, and
Yes.
it's like you
That's-
don't know
that's what
your
I was
own
gonna say.
motivation, though. You don't.
Exactly.
Motivation is unconscious.
Right.
So it's not like you can ask somebody, what was your motivation to do that behavior?
You can think you know it, but you won't know
Yes.
it.
Yeah, they say you can't type celebrities because you can't know that person's motivation, which is basically saying that only that person can know their motivation. It's like, no.
No.
The point of the Enneagram is that nobody knows what the fuck they're doing. Nobody knows what their
why we
motivation
need it.
is.
If everybody knew their own motivation, therapy wouldn't be necessary. Like,
Exactly.
Right. Well, another thing it also brings up is when we're talking about the Enneagram, what the fuck is motivation? You know?
Yeah.
Mm,
Like,
fair point.
what can we point to is the motivation of the types or the instincts? And I think that the any kind of motivation that we're speaking to has to consider instinct. You know, the instincts are the literal in motivations. Like the instinctual drives are motivations to meet specific needs, and that the passions are reactions to them, emotional reactions based on the misguided view that we're going to get our essence quality out of the instinctual drive. But that's a pretty complicated chain of motivations
Mm-hmm.
and very layered sense of motivations. And so I actually think that, like I know that Riso and Hudson have like the basic desire, basic fear, and that has been replicated a great deal in a lot of other books and resources. I actually think that those need updating at least, if not, might not even be all that useful because, again, to try to succinctly say what a motivation for one of these are, it's like you have to be critical about what motivation means, our lack of awareness around it, and like I think that you can go to different depths, so to speak, of the psychological structure and point out different motivations. Like
Yeah.
is like at what point is the motivation to restore essence, and then what point is it a motivation to fulfill instinctual needs, and at one point is it a motivation to resolve object relational dynamics. And so they're all kind of together, but they all can be parsed out separately. And they all lead to specific qualities, specific aesthetic choices. That's the collage exercise speaks to a lot of that aesthetic influence. So it's kind of like a throwaway trope or whatever that's really, really, really common. And it only has the effect of just muddling what each type looks like and how they're experienced. And it's sort of like, well, anybody can be any type kind of deal.
Yeah. Yeah, because when people come into the Enneagram and they're trying to figure out their type, you look at a description and you're looking at these highlights, and it's really easy to imagine yourself into a type because how do you sum up a personality structure that is three-dimensional into like one line and say this is what it is? Like, even like for 8 to say this is a type that's seeking to be powerful, like no 8 very few 8s would read that and be like, yeah, that's me, because the
Right.
real core personality mechanism is so many layers deep down. It's so unconscious that you take it for granted, so it's really hard to see yourself doing a personality from the perspective of trying to describe it from the outside. And so maybe what is useful is looking at what each type's core personality, like automatic personality mechanism is, and trying to describe that. But it's hard to do that because each of these types is they're each a personality structure, and it's like a house. And if you understand how a house works, then you can start to see, all right, this is why we can point out like this post or this expression is not indicative of this type structure because it has certain boundaries and certain things that, like certain rules, I guess, that make it up.
I think it's also worth noting that a lot of people want to make the Enneagram more like digestible or approachable or short,
Mhm.
sweet, and to the point, and it's like you can't
Hmm.
really like without losing some amount of its usefulness. So I
Right.
think a lot of people like want it to be shortened down to one line and don't want to do the actual work of understanding the whole type.
Even if you shorten it down to one line, the Enneagram, why it's so powerful is that it hits so deep, and it's not the sort of line that if you were able to shorten it down, that would be simple. Like you
Hmm.
can't just sum up three by saying, "Oh, this is just someone who wants to be valuable," because it's more complicated than that. Like you wouldn't, most threes wouldn't be able to just like read that and be like, "Oh yeah, that's me," because
That's
there's
me. Yeah.
there's more to it than that.
Well, speaking of motivation, I think one of the primary motivations for trying to reduce type 2 and Enneagram to like motivation and even excluding behavior, because I think something that's runs throughout the way we approach the Enneagram, but I don't think we've really named, and something that I'm becoming more aware of as operating in terms of how I use the Enneagram or apply it is that there is the way the type experiences themselves, and then there's the way the type is experienced by others,
Hmm.
Hmm.
and how vastly different those things can be, and how both need to be considered. Because, like, we talk about nines who think they're the most extreme reactive person in the fucking world, and they're really flat and blank on the outside. And it's like maybe they are really extreme and blank, but they're good, or really reactive, but they're good at doing the nine thing. And
Right,
that's what makes
right.
the difference between a reactive type and a nine is that a reactive type cannot and does not even think to, manage their reactivity in that way.
Hmm.
Um, but a lot of the motivation, I think, is really to, on one hand, it's like to help people understand the Enneagram. But think that if people were really interested in transmitting understanding, they wouldn't reduce the Enneagram to such kind of easily misunderstood catchphrases. And
Hmm.
so the motivation there, I think, is to like fucking sell books or sell content, and to kind
Hmm.
of, we live in a infographic influencer
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah. One of the things I appreciate about the Enneagram is that it's so complex and it's so deep that it's going to be extremely difficult to package it for the corporate or package it for these marketing companies that want to sell shit to us. Like it's not as easily accessible in such a simple way. If you're really doing the real Enneagram, doing these the types as they really are, you can't really distill this shit into something that can be sound bites and put on Facebook ads.
We're going to gatekeep, girl boss, and gaslight here.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I think we've all been accused of is gaslighting people because we will assert something that they didn't already understand about the Enneagram or a type. At least I get that a lot where it's like, I don't know, I might say something like nines are not actually conflict avoidant, or like that's not actually the like defining feature of nine, even though a lot of authors define nine as that. And they're like, oh, you're trying to gaslight me because I know that's not true or something because of this book, but that's first of all, that's not the definition of gaslighting.
Yeah. It's called a disagreement online.
But this is this thing where the Enneagram is it's very immediately compelling because you can kind of see the archetypes very like immediately, but it takes a lot to get past our first, third, and 20th impression of each type. I mean, that's why we've all been working with the Enneagram for over 10 years each. And, that's what typing services are about. That's what Dark Arts Academy is all about. It's like there's so much more to fucking learn. And a lot of times people feel very prideful of their like first impression of whatever the fuck they've learned, and that it just stops them from learning further.
Hmm. Yeah, I've picked up different typologies over the years, and most of them didn't stick because they didn't have the sort of depth and dimension that the Enneagram has. And part of what makes it so cool is that it never ends. I mean, I've been studying or interested in the Enneagram since like, goddamn, like my last year of college. Like it's been since 2006 or 2007 or something. It's been a long time, and I would have gotten bored and left it if I wasn't continually learning like transformational shit, like life shifting kind of shit from the system. So a lot of times people come into this stuff and they've read a book or two and they feel like they've already got it down, and it's understandable that they would feel that way, but strap the fuck in. This is a lifelong fucking interest, and if you are really encountering the Enneagram, your shit's gonna be fucked up over and over again. You don't know shit.
It's true. Fun little tidbit for you, Emika. In 2007, I was 12.
Wow.
You're welcome.
Podcast is getting very inappropriate.
A lot of times what happens when you illustrate that the types are these distinct type structures, people respond by saying, no, you're too close-minded.
Yeah.
Like, because the way people do these like soundbite one-liners, it gives you a lot of room to imagine yourself into a lot of different types. But once you get down to what the type is, it's really narrowed down. It's really limited. And yeah, that's exactly what the fuck it is. It is literally really limited.
And their pushback is there's a lot of different kinds of fours or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's like being the type that withdraws into themselves and rejects everything else doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room to like be a lot of other things. You know, I mean, that was learning I was a 4 was really shocking, because seeing how much 4 describes me. Like, that's the thing, is they'll often go, 4 describes me to a T. And then at the same time, they'll be like, there's a lot of different kinds of 4s. And for me,
how
like,
does it do both?
right. And so for me, like, learning about 4ness really characterized me in a way that was horrifying and disgusting, because it was like, I thought I was unique, and then I'm just a fucking product, you know?
Replicant.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I got obsessed with it, because I was like, I had to know like ins and outs of this thing and to try to find what was not just the pattern. But yeah, it's like part of the horror, especially in Hexad, is that there's not a lot of variety. And that ego structure in itself is it's a constriction. You know, the more we are identified with it, the more constricted we are, and the more limited are the repertoire of reactions and patterns and behaviors and all that shit. And the more unrealistic and yet like identified we are with whatever our quote unquote motivation might be.
And you know, a lot of people were making fun of it's a lot of 9s who are, you know, looking for a sense of individuation from a type description, in which a lot of what's going on there is imagining themselves into vague descriptions. And so when you constrict that down and say it's actually really specific, and in a way that actually causes them to maybe see that some of these sharp edges don't match, that's when they kind of get reactive.
Yeah, another thing that kind of drives me nuts, maybe there's arrogance here, probably arrogance here, but
That's fine.
that's fine. But
Arrogance is allowed.
Says the 8.
y'all get like, what really will drive me crazy is I get so many people that like will often come to me for some kind of Enneagram something, like, you know, session or just question or something like that. And I'll give my point of view, and I don't expect anybody to agree with my point of view, but they will say stuff like, well, here's a life circumstance that you just probably don't understand that probably changes the type so that it looks more like what I think it is. And I'm just like, I just like have such little fucking patience for that now, because not only is it like, it's usually the person who then themselves has a work in progress understanding of the Enneagram, then to say, well, actually, like, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but in this point, you don't know what you're talking about because of this circumstance I just made up. And it's like, all right, you know what? That could be true. I don't care, but I want you to like fucking work with it and think it through and figure that shit out and come back to me. If no, don't even come back to me. I don't care. But it's one of those things. It's like these like life circumstance, like, oh well, this life circumstance changes it. Or like, you know, one of the good examples was the ways that people online got mad at the way I describe sexual instinct as being about sexual attraction, and you know, people accusing me of being sexist because I was saying that women want sex and want to be sexually attractive. It's like you know, it's like, God, just come on, just think about it. Just go away for a minute and think about it.
I mean, we've said it before, but that's an attachment type thing. That deal of my life circumstances were such and such, and so that's why I'm a 4. That's a really nice, happy, sunny 4
Yeah.
because I had to be in my family, or else I would be abandoned. Yeah.
Or it's also that, let's say you catch somebody doing their type. Like you say, let's talk
Right.
about this example from your life and let's look at it, and you discuss with them and show them this pattern that you're exhibiting in this situation is 9 or it's 6. And they pull back and say, oh, well, actually, there's this other situation that if we looked at would show that I'm not actually the thing that you're saying, because this situation that I brought to you that I thought would show the type that I want to be is not actually showing the real me. And so there's this thing of, even because, like, for example, with Enneagrammer, we have people record videos. Like we used to in the past, and I think John still does this, and David does sometimes, of just doing a typing session, which is somebody, you're interviewing them and together, you're having discussions and you type them during the session. And that's a lot harder to do. It's like kind of like high wire circus act, where you have to not only pay attention to what the other person is saying, but not allow them to influence you determining their type. So it gets really complicated. We stopped doing that with Enneagrammer because when somebody makes a video, it's their chance to craft whatever it is that they feel is who they are, and for as much time as they want to. It's like, this is your chance to say and answer these questions and really give a snapshot of who you are. But still, people will get typed and they'll say, that video that I made and I spent all that time doing does not represent me. Here's another video, and hopefully you'll see something else different.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, this thing that I put my energy into and had total control over, that's not the real me. Yeah.
But as an attachment, it really does feel that way.
Yes.
It's
Okay.
the annoying part, is like, you guys are laughing, but it's like, it really does feel like, well, but that's not really me. Like, let me show you really me. And then
Right.
nothing ever really is really you. It's
Right.
such a frustrating cycle.
Well, I guess, I think one of the things you mentioned on, I forget what call it was, maybe the last attachment to disconnect call with Xander and Courtney, was that for attachment types, it is always contextual. So
Mhm.
who am I for this situation? How you're adapting for this situation. So it doesn't feel like any one instance is you, because it's a
Mhm.
version of you.
It's a fun little game.
God, and that's like, I mean, what's so funny, 4 and 9 get confused because that's like such the opposite stance
Totally.
of 4.
Yeah.
Like, I have to be consistently me all the fucking time. Like, I have to be unbending to any context. And that's like why 4s are so annoying. I mean, that's why I guess Hexad's so annoying. But,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, it is. It really is.
I have to be this all the time, no matter what, uninfluenced by anything. And that just doesn't seem like, it seems like everybody is doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe the thing 3s get projected on as fake in the Enneagram, and I don't want to say that this is true for all the attachment types, but all the attachment types on some level doing a similar deal. Not to say that it's fake, but some
Adapting.
people, adapting, and this is something that Beth has recognized in herself, that she comes across like a nice person and people genuinely like her. She's super warm, and then on the back end, people discover that she can be really uptight and demanding. And so it's this thing where I'm saying, well, you should just be uptight and demanding up front, so that then people who appreciate and like that can actually connect with the real you, instead of like trying to mask it or trying to like just get the attachment with this sort of the thing that you feel like you need to do to get people to like you initially. Because if they're going to find out anyway, what you're really, the back end. So it's easier. Like, I can be an asshole sometimes, but everybody knows it. So I'm not like, everyone knows that I'm a dick on some level. So either you like me or you don't. Whereas I think there are sometimes a lot of attachment types feel like they have to do certain things to get the connection going. And maybe later on people discover like there's an aspect of you that they didn't expect, and they feel that that's fake.
Yeah.
So did she say she felt like she could, like, be demanding and needy up front?
No, I mean, part of the issue is like those two parts of her are still her. It's just that she feels really uncomfortable endangering what she feels like endangering the connection up front by, just letting it loose that she's has these maybe what people might consider unpleasant traits. But I think if people think it's unpleasant, that's fine. They're gonna find out at some point either way. So
Right.
what's the point?
Yeah, attachment types need to learn that just being yourself up front, it culls, the herd, and then people that are just attracted to whatever the real you is, that's your people. You know what I mean? And you're
Mhm.
gonna
I think
have
you're
real
oversimplifying it a little bit, David.
you're gonna have real relationships and stronger relationships, and you know what I mean? It'll be
Totally.
and you
No,
won't
I
be
don't know what you
so
mean.
dissipated.
Yeah, Nancy, what do you think?
No, that pisses me off because he's over here saying you just have to be yourself. Oh, it's so simple. Just be yourself and it'll call the herd. Well, I can't do that. Most
Well-
attachment kind of types can't
well-
just go into a room going, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be myself. That doesn't happen.
What happens
So
if you
what
do
is
that?
it that stops? Yeah. What the fuck's wrong with you?
Yeah, what happens if you? What would happen if you did that?
The issue is it just gets swept away. The me at one point just gets swept away. So there's no like me to be in a certain situation because
Okay.
it just is gone. So
Well,
it's not an option of being like I'm gonna be me. It's like, well, if
But-
I try to just be me, I end up literally not like being mute because I'm just
But
like
isn't-
there's nothing.
Part of particular to 3 is a certain way of kind of needing to adjust to what you're seeing the other person seeing you as or something. That makes sense?
Yeah. I mean that is part of 3, yes.
I mean,
I don't know what you're trying to say here.
I'm just trying to point out how screwed up you are. No,
Oh, okay.
yeah, well, I guess it's a sort of more involved in like really making the work of what you're doing. When you, as you just said, like you step into a room with some other people, you've actually got to go to work to see how they're seeing you in a certain way. And so that's like particularly, I don't know, somehow so adaptive in a certain way. That's, I don't know. It seems it's a little different from 6 and 9.
Well, I think, the sort of reflexive adapting and picking up on whatever the attachment cues are is just like inherent in attachment types. But I think that their work is to cultivate like a touchstone of self.
Mhm.
So it's not like, oh, who am I right now or something like that. It's like you can put your foot in the pool of, oh, these are the swimming impressions of things I could attach to and ways I could respond or adapt. But also knowing that I do that, and like so that's like the third piece is like there's whatever we call me, which I know is very hard to grab onto and to understand directly for an attachment type. Then there's the pool of impressions or the atmosphere of impressions I could draw from. And then there's just knowing that I do that pattern. And I think accumulating like data over time, of self-observation over time, where it's like, okay, this is what it feels like in my body when I'm open to these impressions and I'm responding to them. And, this kind of shit, just like not necessarily running to grab onto who am I in this moment, but really just seeing more and more texture around the pattern of adapting starts to kind of evoke cues, like little things you catch
Mhm.
yourself in the moment, and just plus inner work of just balancing the centers a little bit. That gives you a location that you can always go back to, remembering to be present in the body, in the heart, and the mind as best you can.
Yeah, I think there's a place that attachment types have to go to in the body to know that that's who they are, like
Mm.
in the moment. And for me, at least, it's like something clicks on, and there's a different sensation in the body when I'm not being me, right? But there is a bit of oversimplification happening when you guys talk about it because that is a lot of work and that is a lot of self knowledge to be able to be like, oh, this is me. Or this is, at least a touchstone here. Like it's taken me like 26 years to have a touchstone even.
Sure.
So, it's just it's a lot of work.
I always hear from attachment types though that like usually they kind of know like what the deal is. I mean, at least with like Alexander, she'll talk a lot about like, oh, I knew this the whole time, but
Mhm.
like I adapted or I did my attachment thing. I was talking to Courtney on the phone yesterday, and the way she put it, yeah, it was like with outsourcing the heart and the mind for 9.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just like
Mm.
or being a heart and mind without a body, so it's like not being put into action. So it's like those toggling between those two.
Mm.
And so like yeah, with the 3, it's like outsourcing the heart, outsourcing the identity. And one thing might be for 3 is like identity that's not a doing, it's not an
Mhm.
action.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like just being a piece of shit nobody, which is the line to healthy 9
Mhm.
for the 3.
For me, anyway, I've heard probably a lot of threes is like not contributing to the moment, like just existing.
Like
Yeah.
embracing just existing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to contribute.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point actually. Is assertive types always feel like they got to push into something.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that's been coming up in sessions I've been doing with people is, people always ask the question, like, what do I do now? What do I do with this information? How do I grow as a 9? How do I stop doing this pattern? And the blind spot, just as
Mhm.
a wedge to actually find, like, for example, self-pressed blind, to really center in oneself, that to really get in touch with that sense of grounding, to
Mhm.
find, like, okay, what is me, or what do I want, what are my thoughts, what are some practices to ground oneself. And one thing I was really impressed by, the OPS people put out a video this week or something about, this is the same question that everybody always asks after they've been typed, like, what do I do? How do I grow? And they distilled it so simply, at least in their system, that what they're calling the last function, which would be like a blind spot, that this is the thing that you have to work on, that you have to practice. And I wanted to come up with something like that for, I mean, they did that for all the types. Like, if you, I've already shared an example for John, like if you are TI at the top, like your life sort of struggle is feeling like, oh, I'm being emotionally manipulated at the opposite, FE. And so this is the question that keeps coming up. Every session I've ever had is the same question. What do I do as a 9 to grow? To have something simple enough and actionable enough that people can grab onto with the blind spot, or
It's the blind
um,
spot.
and I don't know if there's something with the lines of connection that can be something quick that
Mhm.
people can tap into there as well. There's something that they can actually go and practice immediately. That would
I
be
mean,
cool.
in my view, it is the blind spot. Like I think the reason is for me that the blind spot is the key is because the stacking is rigid, or like I think of it as like tense, like a tense muscle where you're like, contorted out of what's natural because you think unconsciously you're going to get your type's essential quality through your dominant instinct.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you start to relax the instincts, you're relaxing the ego structure. And what that means is that you're able to see that who and what you are is not contingent totally on just being a dominant instinct machine.
Mm-hmm.
And you're able to actually step back sometimes from complete identification with the personality and actually have a space inside for where you can not only experience yourself as a more 3-dimensional person, but you also have the room inside to sometimes taste a little bit of the essential quality. It might be just like just a little glimmer, might be something more profound. But when we start to have more room inside, so to speak, our personality structure relaxes and becomes more transparent. And when the passion, which is what, the thing in us, the emotional need in us for the essential quality, related to how we're doing in response to instinctual goals. When the passion is a bit relaxed, then the mental center opens up. And so it's like from the body and all this tension and all this like keeping things in and out and going, that relaxes, the heart relaxes, and the mind relaxes. And so I really do think it is as simple. I mean, it's more complicated, of course, but it's simple as the blind spot. Part of the difficulty is how do we define the instincts? Like, that's why I wrote a fucking book. So buy the book, please.
Mm-hmm.
But like that there's so much bad information about what the instincts are and how to adequately integrate them. And a lot of that trouble is because there's not like an actual understanding of what these instinctual drives are and how they function. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Someone's texting me today because they were like, they were listening to an alternative Enneagram podcast, Enneagram 2.0, and they were trying
Jesus.
to land on their type, and they were saying, okay, they're describing this type as this way, and I see some of this in myself, but I don't see this much myself. And basically, they were saying that like, okay, they're good at some things in self-pres, but maybe not so good at these other things in self-pres. And like my response, like I don't know I didn't listen to the thing or whatever yet, but my response was like I just have not found this like way of describing type as like just like the book descriptions in terms of like, well, they're more like this and they're good at this and bad at this. Like I find the good and bad at in terms of understanding instinct is like really, really does not create clarity because I mean, as a sexual dominant, there are ways I am fucking amazing at sexual and there's some ways I'm fucking horrible.
Yeah.
And in the same way, I'm fucking horrible at social, and in some ways I'm weirdly good at social.
Right.
And last thing I'll say before I shut the fuck up is I can speak to myself, of course, but like, with Alexandra and watching her integrate the sexual instinct, like that sense of integrating the sexual and finding it in her own body and what she's responding to and turns her on and all this kind of stuff has been enormous work for her in terms of finding like who she is independent of the attachment stuff. And it's shown up in her appearance, like with the way she's letting her hair be curly and all this kind of stuff. But it's like giving her such a sense of herself and her own energies. And I think that's true with no matter what our blind spot is that like, I mean, for at least three of us here that are social blind, getting a little social instinct and like how we like see it like helps us see ourselves, which is so fucking basic and dumb, but it's like, that's how you start. That's how you start with this stuff, I think, is really the blind spot. I mean, you can start in a lot of different ways, balancing the centers, of course, but blind spot is part of that.
Yeah, it's you made a really good point because it's a lot of podcasts and websites try to talk about types in terms of these descriptions, and people who are trying to figure their types out are trying to compare themselves and say, oh, I think I do that well. And that brings up another point of something that people often point to as a reason why they think they're a certain type, because they feel like they do certain things well. And types and instincts have nothing to do with your level of competency, with how good you're doing it. And so sometimes people get typed and they say, oh, how can I be self-pres when I neglect self-pres? Like, these types are not about how well you're doing with something. It's really about where you're located. And that's one thing that I love about, my orientation to learning the Enneagram was through typing, is that you can argue and say whatever the fuck you want all day long, which is why quizzes are incredibly inaccurate, because you're asking somebody to self-locate and tell you about themselves, which is fucking pointless. But we're doing our type nonstop. Like, that's one of the things that, can piss people off so much about typing, is that these personality structures are automatic and they're going on moment to moment. Your instincts, you're doing them all day long. So if you put together a collage, it does have a distinct style that reveals your instinct stack. And a lot of people think that's a crazy idea, but your type is a nonstop thing and you're not aware of it. And that's why it fits into a very distinct pattern. And so it's not about competency. It's about like where you're located, the things that you take for granted. I mean, you can be a complete slob who doesn't take care of themselves and still be self-pres. You can be a shut-in that has like only one friend and be a social type. You can be a very cringy, unattractive fucking person who's a sexual type. It's not about what you think you're good at. It's about like where you're actually located and what you're oriented to. And it's happening all the time.
Another thing is people are doing their type when they're conceptualizing the types. So like when we say, for example, 4 is a disdainful, dismissive, hateful, etc., they think we're saying bad things about 4s.
Yeah.
Right.
No, those are good things.
Right. And it actually, it is in the 4 superego. because you're cutting off, you're separating, you're differentiating. That's quote unquote good to type 4. And in the overall scheme of things, I mean, this is cosmic 9 here. Why wouldn't there be some really negative types?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I mean, that's balance, actually.
Right.
No, don't say
Yeah.
that. Yeah, no. I mean, exactly. And Emeka uses the word structure, and going back to the critique I made, it's like comparing. Oh, I'm like this, but I'm not like that. I'm good at this, but I'm not like I'm bad at this. Is totally useless head games because it's about structure. Like part of what the way I set up my book is I start with the instinctual needs, and then I build from there onto what okay, all right, you get the instinctual needs, and then this makes a coherent instinctual drive. Okay, and then what's an instinctual type, or what is the instinct itself, and then what is an instinctual type, and then what does instinctual type look like with the Enneagram type? And you got to kind of like you always have to be able to trace things back to a kind of an origin point. It has to move from a structure, and that way you can see the pattern. The structure is based on patterns of attention, where my emotional energy goes, where my physical energy goes, where my mental energy goes. But that structure is like really, really fucking important, and that's what colors, everything David just spoke to, everything you just spoke to, and how you can look at somebody and have a pretty good guess of what their type could be, like narrowing it down like at least 3 types just by looking at somebody.
One of the things that I've been really appreciating is looking at least the concept from the OPS people is this idea of a tidal wave, which is they're saying that if a blind spot, every type has a blind spot, and if it's unaddressed, like maybe at the 10-year mark is a backlog of unaddressed shit that eventually becomes a tidal wave, and you have like a real problem. And so for us social blinds, that there's going to be an eventual point, and John has experienced something recently like this, where you're not doing the social thing, you're not seeing yourself, you're not seeing your relationships, and at some point you realize, because something terrible happens, that you realize, oh, I haven't been handling this. And so I think there's something to be said about each type having a blind spot and having an eventual problem because of that blind spot, and that being a way to actually locate what type that you might be, because it's real easy to identify with something based on positive traits or things that you might see in yourself that you like, but it's real challenging to look at the things that are wrong with you, look at the fucking reoccurring life problems, and to recognize that is your blind spot. And each type or each instinct stacking has a blind spot. And for example, as an 8, at some point I realized, within the Enneagram, that the heart center is neglected in 8s. And so that's like a neglected center in my personality structure, which not just, I'm not doing heart, but it actually separates me from a lot of experiences. And so recognizing that each type is limited severely in a very clear and distinct way. And if you're not doing an instinct, you have an instinctual blind spot, you're going to run into a huge problem because you're not paying attention to this aspect of life that is essential. So typing yourself based on your life problems, because you can't fuck around with those areas. That shit fucking hurts. And, that becomes a lot clearer. And I think if we can frame types from the perspective of what are the huge life problems you end up running into if you're neglecting the heart center, or if you're neglecting the social instinct, that's I think a good way to really catch people where it hurts.
My brain is turning this into super self-pres 3 world.
Okay.
And I think it's kind of entertaining. So this is reminding me a lot of, like, if you want to get better in sports, you have to film yourself and watch where you're fucking up.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of trace that back to what the base issue is. So
That's
I don't
cool.
know. It's kind of helpful to have someone else watch you and point things out. I think it's
Yeah.
hard to do this on your own.
Right.
Right,
Which
which
is
is
why you should be typed from the outside.
Right. This thing that people also say, because related to the statement that it's about motivation, not behavior, people also say that only you can know yourself, which is bullshit.
False.
Like, you are the last person in the room that knows what the fuck you're doing. That's the point of personality. Everybody else knows where you're fucking up, but you.
Yeah, one thing I came to, imperfect analogy, but it's like your type is your brain. I mean, don't mean it literally, right? But it's, can your brain look at your brain? No.
No,
You know what I
right.
mean? Yeah.
Right. Can your brain look at your brain?
Yeah, and some people have said things about how both our group or whatever community and OPS both repeat some of the same things. Anyone who's doing accurate typing will land on this same sort of advice that like you don't know yourself. Like you're gonna type yourself upside down, and people think that this is like a marketing strategy to get people to type themselves. Like that is the whole point, is that you can't fucking see yourself. And just like you go to try on clothing at a store, you need a mirror to show you that you've got a hole in your back pocket or something, your ass is hanging out. Like you need something else to show you that you have a blind spot. You're not able to see certain things, and that's why it's helpful to get an outside perspective, because you don't have the ability to see yourself without some kind of reflection from someone else.
Right.
Some people think it's a matter of like intelligence or like knowledge. Like those of us who have been involved with the Enneagram for over 10 years are still struggling with different aspects of realizing how much we're still learning about ourselves, that things that we didn't even realize about ourselves that have been going on for years and years and years. That this idea that you can't see yourself never ends. It's not like you reach a point of, I'm smart enough now or I know enough now that I can see myself. No, like it never, you're still blind to different aspects of who you are.
Right. Absolutely.
That reminds me another one of nines who think they're fours, think that a lot of them, when you read about type 4, then that's really the work of getting beyond your type, is just reading about what 4 is. That one comes up a lot. I used to do that, all this negative 4 stuff, but now I don't because I read about it.
That's inner work 101 right there. Just read the description. You're done.
Yeah.
That's really dumb.
I like that one.
It's like recognizing how most of us have, learning about your type is one thing, and then seeing yourself do the type. And like, how much do we know what social is and still not even feeling like fucking dumbasses still with social? Like, it doesn't matter how well you know this stuff. It's still a blind spot for you. You still have to make incremental progress to get better.
Yeah, I said it, I think, in a conversation, maybe it was a side conversation we had. Like, John can write really well about social, and I can do a few things here and there in that space too, maybe. But when it comes to us just riffing on it on the podcast, it's like, we just can't elaborate on it because we can't contact it. You know what I mean? Unless you like did some really intentional inner something, to find it. Yeah.
One thing I find interesting sometimes is people say, at least with the instincts, is that they feel like they do all three equally well. And I'm like, all right, bet. Like, how about you tell me about your blind spot? Tell me how you're doing your blind spot. Because when you force someone to talk about their blind spot, it like just even verbalizing about that is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Sure.
you start to see
That's right.
that you're actually unconsciously pushing away from that instinct, and just even talking about it, you see that how fucking reduced and dumb it is. Whereas someone who is a social type can just go on and on with so much nuance about that instinct if they're talking about it. And so I know a lot about social, but to try to like talk about social right now in this moment, it's not going to be easy for me. That's not a matter of lack of knowledge or smarts or anything else. It's just like, it's literally a blind spot. It's hard.
Yeah, it's like you're not able to contact it in your body to start talking from your body with it or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Motivation, not behavior. I think we've probably hit most things.
One thing I meant to say a while back, but I forgot. I found one thing that helps me kind of stay with myself in moments of wanting to turn it on or whatever, is kind of making fun of myself. I think that really helps. I know that's kind of like a dumb way of handling it, but if I'm trying to kind of relate to someone and I'm like kind of having to try hard, I can kind of make fun of myself and be like, oh, there you go again. Oh my God, you're just like being such a dumbass, just trying to relate to these people when they're so boring. Like, just let them be boring. Like, just kind of teasing myself about it instead of just trying to force myself to be me. I can keep doing my attachment shit, but just teasing myself about it. And then, like, once you name it, it kind of helps turn it off a little.
Oh, yeah, it gives it some space.
Yeah.
I've underestimated how much people like hearing people talk about anything.
My favorite true crime podcast will chat with each other for like a solid 45 minutes, and I listen to every minute of it.
It's like people have whole careers just talking shit. And I'm like, I could talk shit for a living.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, it was funny. I had a parasocial moment a couple weeks ago. I saw Chapo Trap House, one of my favorite podcasts, like live.
Yeah.
And it was wild because I was like in this audience and I was like I was noticing like how familiar I felt with these idiots, you know? And I was like,
yeah.
Because it wasn't just like seeing like a celebrity or something. It was like, oh, I've heard their conversations for like hours and
Sat
hours.
in their house and listened to them.
Yeah. It was really interesting, but it made me excited if this ever takes off and doing live shows.
Totally.
It was like such a good energy and like people were loving it. So I don't know, it was kind of fun.
Yeah. My social is just like catching up to this thing of just people watching and listening to other people on a weekly basis and being invested in them. And I'm like, I'm really shocked that people are tune in every week and so invested in everything that we say. It's like really kind of weird.
And it's also
I knew it was possible this whole time.
It's also us realizing that we like to do this. Like,
right.
Oh yeah, we kind of like to do this. We like to talk to people.
Yeah.
That was a big part of it, yeah.
Yeah, no, for me, for real, like the first couple like times we were doing it, I was like, oh, I gotta do this fucking podcast again. And then I'd be like really enjoying it. And then but I'd have to remember like whatever like resistance to the obligation I had, I was like, oh, but I actually enjoy it when I'm doing it. You know?
Right,
It was
right.
like this weird fucking thing.
Like I feel that way about the sessions I do. I always dread doing the sessions, and then I do the sessions and I feel good after. So it's this weird social thing where once I actually get into the social and I'm talking to you to somebody, I'm having a good time. But like before it, it's like fuck. But the idea of the podcast, like I don't know how long it took, but maybe a couple months before it was actually a lot of fun, and it was like something
It took a long time for it to be fun for me.
just looking forward to it because it's just getting comfortable being recorded and not giving a shit about being recorded and just being yourself.
Yeah,
well, you guys don't let me be myself. You know?
We're not giving giving women.
We're not elevating
women's voice.
It's never gonna not be a joke.
We don't allow you to be yourself because that's not what we do here. We just
you
take
really
up too much
hate
space.
women, actually.
Even though all our guests has been, we need to have some male guests. We haven't had any male guests.
We have had very few straight male guests. I don't know if I can name one.
I think Xander is the only straight male. We had Michael's Teachings guy and Joseph, and then have we had other dudes?
You had your friend, the archetypal masculine that we did with him.
Oh yeah,
Curtis.
Yeah.
Few and far between though.
We love the ladies. If that wasn't clear.
Same. Show me your titties.
But yeah, this year's gonna be fun. I mean,
Nancy, your titties.
Is that allowed?
I'm
That's
offended by this kind of talk.
Yeah.
Well, it's okay because I'm female, so you know.